Hello, thanks for being here so numerous today for this new edition of the lecture in honor of the laureates of the Nobel Prize in Economics. Such a large audience is not really a surprise, since today at ENSAE we are particularly lucky, happy and honored to have two stars. We have Antonin Bergeaud, who has been awarded for the Best Young Economist Prize in 2025, and Philippe Aghion, who has been awarded by the Nobel Prize in Economics, together with Joël Mokyr and Peter Howitt, for his work about creative destruction. So thanks a lot for being here despite your particularly busy schedule. Today we will have Antonin will start talking about theories of growth, and then allegedly theories of growth. And then Philippe will take the floor to talk about the economics of creative destruction. I will first give the floor to Elise Coudin, who is the new director of ENSAE, which is the building that received us today. Thanks very much.
Merci Bertrand. Moi, je parle en français. Ben voilà, et bien, merci beaucoup. Alors, en tant que nouvelle directrice de l'ENSAE, c'est vraiment un honneur, et représentante aussi du groupe ENSAE, c'est un honneur pour moi de vous accueillir, Antonin Bergeaud et Philippe Aghion, dans les murs de cette école et dans le cadre de cette Nobel Lectures. Et c'est aussi un immense plaisir de voir à cette occasion toute la communauté IP Paris, ENSAE, jeunesse réunie, à savoir chercheurs, enseignants-chercheurs, membres de l'administration aussi, étudiants évidemment, et postdoctorants, doctorants, et aussi les élèves à qui on a offert cette lecture. Voilà, merci à tous. Et puis, Antonin, the floor is yours.
Okay, hello everyone. Thanks a lot for having me today. So I was asked to discuss briefly the contribution of Philippe to economic theory and growth economics. So this is basically one slide, and this is the only technical slide I will show that explain. Let me just remove that. They explained Aghion Howitt, which was, I mean, Philippe did a lot of other things, but of course, Aghion Howitt is the flagship that was emphasized by the Nobel Committee. So it's basically a theoretical breakthrough. And I think the main reason it's a breakthrough is that this is one of the first, probably the first model that can explain sustained long growth, micro-funded in general equilibrium, where the idea is that growth is not exogenous anymore. It comes from incentives that firms invest into R&D. They are motivated by profit. They are fighting against competitors. And because they are constantly fearing the entry of new firms that will compete with them, they continue to invest into R&D. R&D generates positive externality. Everyone can catch up very quickly thanks to those externalities. And then that explains how you can get at the steady state or at the balanced growth path, a positive or a non-zero level of growth. And I think Aghion Howitt was the first time that they will make growth an IO problem. And I think it comes also from the fact that Philippe had a background in contract theory and in micro theory, and that's how, all these ideas come together. So, basically the main formula, I think if you look at the Nobel lecture, there is just one slide with this formula, which is the main formula in Aghion and Howitt. I explain what growth is about. Growth is ZI plus Z. This is innovation by firms, incumbent firms. This is innovation by entrants. And then you multiply it by this step size parameter that captures directly how much innovating increase the overall level of quality in the economy. So every time someone innovates, that creates growth, but then there's much more mechanism that you can dig out from it. And Philippe was, of course, very influential in pushing the frontiers in his own model. But just to give you an idea of how much, Aghion Howitt was influential, this is the number of citations received every year to the paper. And you see, usually you get this, these bell curves that you expect. But, well, something might have happened in 2025 because, as you can see, there is a bit of a jump. And so if you just try to shape, to predict the future, statistically, you get to 1 million citation very quickly. So I don't know what will be next year, but that's quite impressive. Of course, I think anyone who has a Google Scholar profile would agree that 18,000 citation is something quite exceptional. So, instead of talking about Philippe, because I think you can just turn on TV or radio at any time this day and you will learn about Philippe. So I thought that I would do something that journalists won't probably do and try to explain, to convince you that Philippe is himself Schumpeterian. So what I did is that I look at a bunch of statistics. And the first one, something that we usually look at is what we call the n-grams from Google. This is the number of time some particular set of words are mentioned in the universe of books that are digitized by Google, which is not all books, but a lot of books. So this is Aghion and Bolton. So it's a series of papers that Philippe started during his PhD, I think, or very early before even Aghion Howitt. And you see that it started to get influential in the mid-80s, and then you have this bell curve. Then Aghion Howitt take over, and so you can see those Schumpeterian waves. Okay, there is a bit of an increase that take over the Aghion and Bolton. And then Philippe started to collaborate with more people. And so you have Aghion et al. That, are kind of pushing again the frontiers. And you see that it flattened a little bit at the end. So it's not so clear whether it's a truncation bias or not. But if you're worried that, the Aghion Howitt is not influential anymore, you can look at, Schumpeterian growth overall, and you see that it's trending up and it's not looking, it's not really flattening. So in a sense, the positive externalities are there. Okay, this failed, but it was supposed to be a bunch of papers superimposing together. So that's okay. So these are all the papers that I could find from Philippe that are more or less related to the theory of growth. So there's a ton of them, but let me skip them because we can only see the last one, and it's okay. So okay, let's look at other arguments to explain why Philippe is Schumpeterian. So the first thing is that it's a large incumbent who grow by adding many different varieties. Okay, so I actually have a look at, so all of this is based on REPEC statistics. So you can have a look at the shortest path to Philippe. So there is this statistic on this indicator called the Kevin Bacon indicator, which tells you how much central you are. And Philippe is number 2, I think, in the world. And actually, there's 26 CREST faculties that have at least one common co-author to Philippe. So, I leave it to you to find who is your common co-author, but that's quite impressive. And I tried very hard to find someone that is farther than 3 degrees from Philippe, and I couldn't do it. So, this is the full network. So basically, Philippe co-authored with, everyone. So you can find Peter Howitt in yellow, and then there's all these co-authors. And I had to stop at 1 degree because if I plot 2 degrees, there is 10,000 people. So I couldn't, present the graph. So very large incumbents, and in a sense, collaborating with a lot of different people. But if you recognize some of, those researchers that you can see here, they are in a lot of different fields. And in fact, you can group them into different communities. And I think that that's quite, something that is also very impressive. In a sense, is that Philippe's contribution had follow-up where Philippe usually is co-author, but in very different fields. So you get trade, contract theory, of course, growth, but also innovation, institution, and so on and so forth. And you can group co-authors based on these clusters. And this is also very much in line with this idea that when you grow, you add new varieties, okay, and then you push the quality of these varieties upward. You don't only stick to your own initial variety. Of course, in the Schumpeterian model, usually when you're a big incumbent, you get monopoly rents. So I won't say Philippe has monopoly rents. That's beyond the scope of this research. But what we can consider is whether or not the entry of new researcher is pushing Philippe to continue to innovate. And so something that I find quite nice is that, so this is a bit of a complicated graph, but this is in the y-axis, you have the age of the co-authors. So age is, from the first paper you published of Philippe, and in the x-axis is the age of Philippe, or in the research age, of course. And well, you can see that there is, There's more and more people that are toward the bottom of this graph. So Philippe collaborates more and more with young researchers, and I think that's his way to manage to solve this Schumpeterian dilemma that you don't fear entrant because you basically collaborate with them. So in a sense, it's a M&A based theory of Schumpeterian growth. And finally, last argument for which Philippe is indeed Schumpeterian. It's this quality ladder story. So if you took all the topics that I showed in the previous network, you can look at how many work has been produced by each of these varieties. And in fact, this is exactly the way you will represent the quality ladder among different varieties in a Aghion type of model. So, you take one essentially variety, which here are a bunch of co-authors working on a topic. And this is how many work Philippe has co-authored in each direction. So, it doesn't really stop. Everything has been pushed up. And this is basically the sum of work that has been published by this team of co-authors. So a lot of works, and the frontier is being pushed up again and again. Okay, and now maybe to get to the serious research, I will give the floor to Philippe that will present this theory.
Well, this is extremely impressive, Antonin. It's a wonderful surprise. Wonderful slides. So mine will be much more predictable than things I've said many times. And so the story I always tell, so first it's a great privilege to work with Antonin. We've been working now for how many years, Antonin? I've been that's right. Yes, we should look at I think we started. 10 years now. We started with the top income. I think that was the first. In fact, before we worked on something else. It was a book, Changer de modèle, but really research together was 10 years ago, and it made a huge difference. So I think if I could go back and voilà, Antonin has been absolutely key to the past 10 years of research. I have a story I always tell about this creative destruction, and when I started to work on growth economics, I wanted to put imperfect competition in growth models, and that's why I went into IO as a student at Harvard. But my dream at Harvard, when I was a Harvard student, was to enter the Harvard Society of Fellows, which is a kind of first-class postdoc. When you enter the Society of Fellows, you are paid like an assistant professor. You don't have to teach. It's highly prestigious. You have dinner with Amartya Sen or Bob Solow every week, and great scientists in physics. And that was my dream at the time. So I was shortlisted to have an oral exam. And I didn't understand. And then at dinner time, right after, Bob Solow was a senior fellow. He was at MIT, but he was a senior fellow at the Harvard Society of Fellows, told me that I did not quite understand the question that were asked to me. And I realized that I had failed the test. So I did not enter the Society of Fellows. Instead, I went to MIT. And at MIT, I met Peter Howitt. And he was my neighbor. And I came to see Peter, and I said, Peter, why don't we try to write a model that would embody Schumpeter's notion of creative destruction? Because I heard about Schumpeter, and there was no such thing as a Schumpeterian growth model. But now I tell myself, imagine that I had succeeded the Harvard Society of Fellows, nothing would have happened. There would not be anything called a Nobel lecture, that I'm sure. We never know the counterfactual, but I mean, I can be certain that without that, failure was crucial. Failing was, and I always tell the story, that even in my love stories, I failed many times, and thanks to which I went to the US and studied and did the Nobel. Had I succeeded in my love stories, I would have probably not left France and not done the Schumpeterian growth theory. So failure in my life has been crucial. Voilà, I want to just emphasize that it has been a succession, it has been a sequence of failures that led to this. Voilà, that's what I want to. Voilà, I want to. Okay, so so here is a picture of a young Schumpeter. There is no and Schumpeter is known for having coined the term creative destruction, the process whereby new innovation displace all technology. I don't know if I can, if there is a way I can move this there. I don't know. Can I? Yeah, like that. Yeah, that's good. Okay. Alors, wait a second. Voilà. So, but you know, as I said, you know, when I studied economics, the leading model was the Solow model, based capital accumulation. You produce output with a stock of capital. You use part of the output to save and invest and increase the stock of capital, and that's how you generate growth. But under reasonable assumptions of decreasing returns to capital accumulation, you cannot have growth forever. There is something else needed called technical progress, but Robert Solow would not tell you where technical progress was coming from. So at MIT, I met this guy, Peter Howitt, and together we designed a growth model that would rest on three main ideas. The first idea is that long-run growth is driven by a cumulative process of innovation where each innovator builds upon previous innovations. Okay, so the second idea is that innovations do not come from heaven. They result from entrepreneurial activities motivated by the prospects of innovation rents. When I innovate, I discover a better product, a cheaper way to produce. That gives me monopoly rents for a while until I'm being superseded by subsequent innovations, okay? And the third idea is creative destruction. New innovations displace old technologies. New innovations make new technologies obsolete. So you see that at the right of this paradigm, there is a contradiction. On the one hand, you need monopoly rents to generate, is the prospect of monopoly rents that induces people to invest in innovation. But on the other hand, yesterday's innovators are tempted to use their rents to prevent subsequent innovation and subsequent entry because they don't want themselves to be subject to creative destruction. And managing a market economy is largely about how to deal with this contradiction. On the one hand, I need these monopoly rents, you know, to motivate innovation activities. On the other hand, I want to make sure they won't be used ex post to prevent subsequent innovations, and that's so I will just voilà, first mention in a nutshell the formal. I take this out and then I stop. So the Aghion-Howitt model was really a model where very simple. You produce output capital Y with the intermediate input small y, and A is the quality or the productivity of the intermediate input in generating final output. Okay, so that's that. And you produce intermediate input 1-for-1 with labor. 1 unit of labor in manufacturing gives you 1 unit of small y of the intermediate input. The second equation, the second thing is that growth comes from innovations, and innovations improve the quality of the intermediate input. When you innovate, you make the quality of intermediate input move from A to gamma A, where gamma is greater than 1. So those are quality improving innovations. Okay, and now innovations, they arrive at a rate. It's a Poisson arrival rate of innovation, lambda Z, where Z is the amount of labor invested in research. So research is invested either 1-for-1 in producing small y, the intermediate input in manufacturing labor, or research labor is used in research, the lambda Z. So the whole model is, oh, thank you so much. The whole model is governed by 2 equations. In fact, one equation would tell you it's a labor market clearing, telling you that the supply of labor, capital L, is used both for innovation and for producing intermediate input. And another equation is a research arbitrage equation that tells you that in equilibrium, you are indifferent between using a unit of labor in manufacturing or use it a unit of labor to generate the next innovation, okay? And together, these two equations determine the equilibrium amount of R&D as a function of the basic parameters of the model, the arrival rate of innovation lambda, the size of innovations gamma, the alpha, which is a measure of competition in the intermediate goods sector, and the rate of interest, the rate of the discount rate, okay? And once you know Z, the average growth rate is lambda Z log of gamma. So lambda Z is the frequency of innovation, and log of gamma is the log of the size of innovation. So that's really the formula. So there was always this idea, what is the solo residual? But here you manage to decompose the solo residual. You finally open the black box of the solo residual. So when with Peter Howitt, after 2 months of work, we got to this formula. Peter said that I told him, look, we may get a Nobel Prize with this. Well, it was a joke at the time, huh? But it's funny that voilà, here we are, Li equal lambda Z log of gamma. We are very happy with this formula. Okay, so there are two basic implications of this model. First one is that the growth rate is positively, productivity growth is positively correlated with the rate of turnover, which is the rate of creative destruction lambda Z. So in places where you have more turnover, more entry, exit, more job creation, destruction, you tend to have more growth. Okay, that's the first prediction. And that tells you also Europe versus US, something that Antonin is one of the things where Antonin is an absolute leader. He would tell you that US does much more fundamental innovations than Europe. So the gamma in the US is bigger, but you also have more turnover in the US than you have in Europe. The more innovating firms nowadays in the US are not the same as they were 25 years ago. And Antonin will tell you that in Europe, they are essentially the same. So, oops. Alors, vous savez, with me, there is always a suspense, is whether and when I will fall down the stage. This one is quite challenging. Okay, so that's very much the basic model, okay? So there were two main extensions of this model. One was to step-by-step innovation. In the basic Aghion-Howitt model, only outsiders innovate. You go from zero to becoming innovator. So for example, Bertrand is there, and I leapfrog Bertrand. You are the current innovator, and I am the next innovator, and I leapfrog you. And there is nothing you can do. And no matter how backward I am leapfrogging you, quoi. And there is nothing you can do there. So in the basic Schumpeterian model, in the basic Aghion-Howitt model, only outsiders innovate, and there is leapfrogging. So that means that the current incumbent cannot respond to the entrant. There is nothing you can do. No matter how productive you are, I leapfrog you the same way. So, but we know that in practice, incumbents also innovate, not only entrants. And so I developed initially, I did it on a train, the 10:05 London Paddington to Oxford with John Vickers. That's where we started it was very funny because when we presented the Nobel lecture, John Vickers wrote to me and Howitt said, mention the 10:05. And the 10:05 is the train leaving Paddington Station to Oxford. And we designed an extension, in fact, where you go step by step. So that means that I cannot leapfrog Bertrand right away. Bertrand is ahead of me, and I need to move a certain number of steps to catch up with Bertrand first, and then get ahead of Bertrand. But then Bertrand has an incentive to innovate, to make it harder for me. That means, for example, if Bertrand, you move to where Thierry is, it will take me more steps to catch up with you before I can become a leader. So if you move from leapfrogging to step-by-step innovation, then the incumbent has an incentive to innovate, is to increase the gap with the follower. You see what I mean? And so he may react to the follower threat. And what you will have typically is that more competition, if I am behind Bertrand initially, more competition with Bertrand may tend to discourage me because I said, well, when I get close to Bertrand, I get less. But more competition will induce Bertrand to innovate more, because Bertrand wants to escape competition with me by innovating more. You see what I mean? So you have these two effects of competition on innovation. It has an escape competition effect for the incumbent with Bertrand, and there tends to be a discouragement effect for the laggard or the entrant that I am myself, you see? And you get to this thing. I always tell the story. You are a classroom, you are equally good. Some of you are the top, some of you are behind, the leaders, the followers. And I let a very good element into the room. What will happen? The top of the class will work harder to remain the top of the class. That's the escape competition effect. But the bottom of the class will work less hard because they will tend to be discouraged by the new entrant. It's exactly the same for firms. Here I represent, based on work with Blondel, Griffith, Prentill, and Howitt, we represent competition by the rate of entry on the market. The blue line are firms that are close to the technological frontier in their sector. And the orange firms are the firms that are far below the technological frontier in their sector. More competition, what we'll have is that the blue firms will innovate more and grow more, and the orange firm innovate less and grow less. And so exactly the thing I told you, you have the frontier firm is the escape competition effect that dominate, but for the orange firm, it's the discouragement effect that dominate. And overall, you have the inverted U. Competition has an inverted U effect on innovation and growth. So that was the first big extension of the model. The second one was done by Clété and Kortum, and then a number of contributors, is the firm dynamics. You can talk about firm dynamics in this model. Here, I represent a firm with 4 lines, and you see the height of the bars reflect how good you are on each activity, and how you grow in this model. Firm F could decide to innovate on another line where, for example, currently it's here. This A, and you would do firm F would do creative destruction on the line by moving it to gamma A. Firm F would displace the current producer, and firm F would become a 5-line firm. You see what I mean? And that's how you grow. How you shrink, someone else does creative destruction on one of your lines, and you shrink from being a 4-line firm to a 3-line firm. How you enter in this model, you are nobody, and you innovate upon a line, for example, this one, and then you become a 1-line firm. How you exit? You are 1-line firm, someone innovates upon you, and you disappear. So you see, this extension of the model allows you to talk about entry, exit, firm growth, firm decline, you see, and we talk about firm dynamics. And it's very interesting because you can account for very interesting facts. First, you can account for the fact that the firm size distribution is very skewed. You have many small firms, very few large firms. Why? Because everybody enters being small, and then you have to survive. To be large, you need to have survived many attempts of creative destruction. And so there are very few that survive, that far, you see. So that right away you get that you have many small firms and few large firms, okay? Another prediction is that you tend to have a positive relationship between age and size. Well, in this model, you start with being a 1-size firm, and then you grow in expected terms. You have a positive correlation between size. You can see that in the US, the relationship is steeper. Why is that? Because in the US, when you are a good innovator, you have access to venture capital and to institutional investors, and therefore you can grow much more than you could in other places. That's why the curve is, and that implies also that if you survive long enough, is that you are really good because you were not driven out by someone very good. You see what I mean? When you are in a country where firms cannot expand much, even when they are good, it allows mediocre people to remain on the market. And that's why, you can be aged without having much growth potential. You see, so in the US is the fact that the good innovators find financing, which implies that the selection process works better, and that even amplifies this positive relationship between age and size. Last prediction is that, of course, the exit rate is higher for young firms and small firms than it is for, old and larger firms. In France, for example, by age, or in US. Why? Because it takes only one. If you are a one-line firm, it takes one creative destruction for you to be driven out. When you are older, you tend to be larger. It takes more than one creative destruction for you to be driven out. You see how you can right away, account for a number of facts about firms: entry, exit, firm growth, relationship between growth and size. That's really what the Schumpeterian model became more, was successful, is that you could not do that with previous growth models. All this, back and forth between empirics of firms and growth models, you could not do with other models. It's a model with heterogeneity. You have small and large firms. You have entrants and incumbents. You have leaders and followers. You can really map growth economics with all these dimensions of firm heterogeneity. You could not do that with previous models. Voilà. That's, I think, is something that really contributed to push the approach. I would like to talk about historical enigma and then rethink capitalism. And let me just talk about some enigma. One enigma is the industrial takeoff. Are you still alive? Oh, you're fantastic. Okay. I always ask the question, are you still there? And so industrial takeoff, that you see, this is the well-known curve due to Madison. Madison was an American economist that worked a lot at OECD, and he tried to use information on urbanization and other things to try to draw the evolution of world GDP or world GDP per capita over time since Jesus Christ, okay? So, and you see that, of course, there are growth episodes here and there, Venice or other places, but you see really what's striking is that the growth takeoff is extremely recent. It dates back 200 years only. It's and it happens in Europe first. It happens in England and then France and then US. But you see that up to 1820, there is not much going on. So you see, I think Sapiens is 10,000 years old. But growth is 200 years old. It's nothing. 200 is less than 3 times my age, which means I'm very old. But I mean, that's the bad news. But it means that it's not much. You see, compared to. So, voilà. Alors, the big question is why in Europe and why so recent? There, you see, let's go back to the Schumpeterian framework. My way of presenting things. Joël Mokyr, it's a way to talk about Joël Mokyr in a way that voilà, it's my own way to reinterpret my co-laureate Joël Mokyr. I'm very, very happy to share this. So that's my way of talking about it. And all this draws from the work of Joël Mokyr, okay? But that's my way of presenting it. So I think I present. So the first thing, remember, long-run growth driven by cumulative innovation. What Joël Mokyr argued is that in Europe, you had institutions that would favor cumulative innovations. You had, of course, you had the printing, but you had freer universities. They could exchange, you see, to some extent, okay? So you have some openness in university, in academia. You had a kind of republic of science, and you had the encyclopedia, in particular Diderot, quoi. Hein? And the encyclopedia would codify knowledge, and therefore that would make it easier. You would avoid the myth de Sisyphe, quoi. Hein? You would avoid having to reinvent each time. And so, thanks to the encyclopedia. So there were a postage also is mentioned by Mokyr as one institution that would favor openness. So he looks at all those things, and altogether they tell you it's in Europe that you really the first bullet point is fulfilled in the 19th century, more than everywhere else. So, second point, you need. I told you innovations result from entrepreneurial activities motivated by the prospect of innovation rights. Well, you needed property right protection. Well, what does Mokyr tell you? It tells you that in England, you had the Glorious Revolution. The Glorious Revolution limited the power of the kings. That made it easier to protect property rights. In France, it took the French Revolution and Napoleon to protect, to get that the kings would not expropriate you. So you had in England first, and then subsequently in France, institutions that would secure property right protection, which is the second bullet point. And the third one is creative destruction, you know, allowing new entrants to come in. And there, Mokir emphasizes a lot the competition between European countries. Suppose I inhibit an entrant in France. I said, you know, suppose that current incumbents colluded with government, said, no, you don't enter. Well, she could move to Switzerland or to England or to neighboring countries and innovate there. In China, there was none of that. You didn't have free universities in China. The emperor could block anybody at any time. You didn't have property right protection. And there was no neighboring country. You know, you could go to the desert Gobi et les dinosaures, il y avait personne. Quoi. There is nobody next to China. Quoi. And you had those conditions in Europe. So that's very much, that's my way of looking, that's my way of explaining Mokir. Through the lens of the Schumpeterian paradigm, okay? So that's one first enigma, why growth took off in the 19th century in Europe and not in China, where so many inventions had taken place. In China, the wheel, the compass, many inventions had taken place long before 1820 in China, long before innovating. Okay, so the second enigma is secular stagnation. That's very much based on work with Antonin. I will talk with, and there is also Ufuk Eksigit and Sina Ates, but I will talk about the work with Antonin in this paper that came out in the Euro Economic Studies. If you look at the average yearly TFP growth rate in the US, you see that between 95 and 2005, there was a growth upsurge. It's very funny because everybody remembers Bob Solow saying, we see computers everywhere, but not in the statistics. Solow said that in exactly right there, right before. So he brought good luck because right when Solow said that we don't see it, whoop, we saw it. So that's the, so you had this growth upsurge. And what's very interesting is that this growth upsurge has a lot to do with IT. It's a lot in IT producing sectors and IT using sector. So it has a lot to do with IT. What you can see is that at the same time as you had the growth upsurge, concentration went up. If you look at the share of sales or the share of employment of the 4 biggest firms in the US, not only in, I show services here, it's true also in manufacturing, it goes up a lot. So this growth upsurge goes along with a big increase in concentration, okay? And you can see that also if you look at markups, that's drawn from work by Delocker, Eckhout, and Unger. They tell you the average markup is going up, that's the red curve. But you see that the within firm markup, which is the blue curve, is not upward trending. That means that within firms, it didn't go up. It's the black curve. It's a composition effect. You had, in fact, what happened is that with the IT revolution, you had the emergence of the GAFAM, of superstar firms. Those were low labor share, high markup firms. And through merger and acquisition and expanding a lot, they became tentacular. They became very big. So it's a composition effect. They were the high markup firms from the start, and they expanded. So that's why the average markup went up, and that's why the average labor share went down. Okay. The problem with that is that, and you can see here, if you look at the growth in establishments per firm, you see that it's the largest firm, those with more than 1,000 employees, that grow more. Usually, you might think that the larger firm should stop growing and the smaller firm should grow. But you see, it's the large firm, those firms that expanded the most. Okay, that's what you see, the red curve. Of course, there is the financial crisis there, but forget about the financial crisis. You see that, that's what I have to show. You see, forget those firms that are the large firms that expand the most, which goes totally consistent with the firm. It's the GAFAMs that expand more than everybody else. The problem with that is that if you look at the entry rate of new firms, that's very Schumpeterian. They discourage new entry. And that's why growth declined so much after 2000. That's why you have this big decline in growth, you know, since 2005. You see, so what happened, and that's the growth, that's the secular stagnation expansion, that's the one we developed with Antonin and our co-authors, is that, in fact, with the IT revolution, you had some superstar firms that knew better than others how to harness the power of IT. They expanded a lot. Competition policy did not prevent them from doing so. So it was not very well designed to prevent them from becoming hegemonic. And they ended up discouraging new entry and new firms. So the way out is to say you should reform competition policy in the US. And so we are still working a lot with Antonin on M&A and how to make competition policy more dynamic, more, don't look only at market share when you design competition policy, but look how you could make sure that a merger and an acquisition would not discourage future entry and future innovation or insist on data sharing or whatever, but design competition policy in a way that, does not result in this fall in new entry and new innovation. And that's really a big challenge now, how to make competition policy more dynamic, less centered on market share and more centered on new entry and new innovation. And that's very much what we are still working on with Antonin and our co-authors, various co-authors on various projects. Okay, so that's the way to look at secular stagnation. And I would like now to talk about the middle income trap. So the middle income trap is this idea that there are some countries that start growing and then they stop in the middle. So for example, Soviet Union, I was a communist in my youth, by the way, and we would say Soviet Union was a bit the model country. Well, I've been changed a bit. Although I went to Colonel Fabien on Tuesday, but I have no time to tell you about my visit to Colonel Fabien, to see Fabien at Colonel Fabien, but I won't talk about that today. Okay, so here it's very interesting. You look at the Soviet Union, and that's a graph due to Ufuk Eksigit, and you can see that the Soviet Union grows very fast up to 1975. And then you see that the per capita GDP in Soviet Union stops growing. So they get at the middle, and they don't grow anymore. And presumably what they did is that they grew through two sources. One was capital accumulation, that's so like in Solo, but we know that they are decreasing returns to the capital accumulation, and imitation. I don't know if you remember the Tupolev 144. You are not born. You were there, no? You are not there at Le Bourget. You saw the Tupolev falling? You were there? I didn't see you there. I didn't know you were there. They imitated the Concorde. Voilà, at Le Bourget, they fall. But, voilà, that's imitation-based growth. So that make it a bit funny. So the idea there is very much. So that's some degree I developed with Daron and Zilbotti, and when I started talking to Daron, I smuggled Daron. He didn't have a passport from Canada to US without a passport, but I won't tell you the story. I smuggled Daron with a big piece. To smuggle Daron in a car is not an easy. I'm very proud of myself because it's not a diaphana element. Okay, so. So people are leaving, and I think they're discouraged. They thought they were coming to a serious lecture, and they said, "But what's this? That's not serious at all." So there are two ways to generate growth here. One way is to grow through imitation. So A bar is the current frontier productivity, and that's my productivity today. One way I can grow from 80 to 80 plus 1 is to catch up with the frontier. That's what I call imitation-based growth. That's why I'm trying to catch up with Bertrand in my step-by-step innovation. Another way to grow is to innovate upon myself. I go from A to gamma A. That's frontier innovation. When you are way below the frontier, when you are China, when Deng Xiaoping started to implement new policies in 1978, China is well below everybody, and the main engine of growth for China is catching up growth, and that's the mu M. But once you get close enough to the technological frontier, increasingly it is frontier innovation that's good. And the policies that are good for imitation are not the same as the policies that are good for frontier innovation. We already saw that with competition. You remember the blue firms and the white firm. We knew that, the firms close to the technical frontier in their sector, the competition makes them innovate more to escape competition. Those that are far, they discourage. The more developed a country is, the more blue firms they are compared to orange firms. So that tells you that the closer to the world technological frontier on average you are, on average, the more growth enhancing it is to have more competition. We already know that from the analysis on, with my blue line and my orange line. So already competition is a policy which is good competition from UN more than from UM. The problem is that some countries, in the process of catching up, they develop some bad things that will prevent moving to competition. Ideally, a country should first go with policies and institutions that are good for UM, and once you are close enough to a bar, you should switch from UM enhancing policies to UN enhancing policies. But it doesn't always happen that way. Because you see, for example, Korea, that's the growth rate of per capita GDP in Korea, right after the South Korea, of course, because if you are North Korea, you would have a flat electrocardiogram at 0. You see, you have high growth rate, but it declines a lot. It declines also because they catch up, but also something happened in Korea. During the catching up phase in Korea, they developed large firms called the chaebols. Those are big conglomerates. These conglomerates was okay to catch up, but they not only they discourage entry of non-chaebol firms, but they put pressure on the Korean government not to move towards more competition because they didn't want the competition. It was not in their interest. So the problem is that during the catching up phase in Korea, you had the emergence of these chaebols that not only prevented non-chaebol, but they also put pressure not to move towards UN enhancing policy like competition, you see. And that explained the middle income trap in Korea. Japan is subject to the same syndrome, although it's not middle income, it's a high income country. You had the Keiretsus, the large conglomerate in Japan, are the Keiretsus. They developed, so between World War II and the early 90s, I mean, Japan grows a lot by imitation. You have these Keiretsus developing, and the same way, not only they discourage non-Keiretsus, but they put pressure on the Japanese government not to move towards more competition and more openness. And that's why Japan is stagnating. Okay, and then you have Antonin on Europe. And then I just... so that's good that I present some. Again, Antonin represents, well, that's the per capita GDP of the euro area compared to, the US. And you see, of course, that you have the Second World War here. That makes we have a lot of destruction of capital stock in particular, and not much innovation. But then between 1945 and 1985, we are catching up in per capita GDP, the euro area with the US up to there, and there we start declining again. And we start declining again because we are unable to move to becoming breakthrough frontier innovators sufficiently. And again, this is Antonin. Antonin shows us the beautiful, I showed that to China. It was very successful because, of course, they're very happy to be there. You see, that's Europe. That's the share of high technology patents by Europe is declining, and China is now emerging. So now you have the US at the top, China emerges, and we are declining. And this, I don't know if you look at Le Monde this weekend, we had an op-ed there, and there were other op-eds of people who try to explain that there is no European decline, and they are misleading you. It's not true. There is a European decline. That's not serious. And in fact, voilà, there is a lot to say on how to present data in a misleading way. I think there should be a nice. We should write something together on that. Okay. So anyway, that's the and Europe is subject to the same problem, and that's why you have the Draghi report. Draghi tells you why is Europe not innovating enough. We don't have a true single market like you have in the US because each country has its own regulation to EU regulation. That's what we call gold plating. We don't have a true financial ecosystem. Venture capital and institutional investors are underdeveloped in Europe compared to US, and we don't have industrial policy. We don't have proper industrial policy. They have that both in the US and in China. And we don't have enough long-term financing of research. We have the LabEx that Antonin showed really generates breakthrough innovation, but we don't have much, in terms of long-term research financing. I told you that failure was crucial to, failure is very important. You need to be allowed to fail to make breakthrough innovation. We don't have enough long-term. You see, LabEx is a 10-year financing. financing. That allows you to fail. Venture capital is something long-term. Institutional investors, they tend to typically to tell managers of large companies, you can fail. We are there. We give you, we give you the long. You can look in the long run. Short-term failure will not be punished as much if we are there. They have a number of things in the US that favors risk-taking, failing, and therefore making breakthrough innovation, which we don't have in Europe. And that's the Draghi agenda. And that, I think, taken seriously. Anybody who tells you there is no decline in Europe, c'est du charlatanisme. C'est pas vrai. That's not true. We have a problem. And if we want to preserve our social model, we will need to deal with this problem. We need to do something. To do ourselves deal, we are subject to the middle income trap syndrome, and we need to get out of that. Okay. So this, by the way, it's a report, the World Development Report of the World Bank called the Middle Income Trap, completely based. Ufuk Aksigit played a big role with the chief economist of the World Bank, totally based on the approach, on the Schumpeterian approach. Okay, I want to just say a few words about rethinking capitalism. Bertrand, how much longer do I have? 10 minutes, okay, and I will stop there. Maybe I won't have much time. You see, I was telling you about Europe and US. And very interesting is that US, on the social model, they are not there. If you look at the Gini, which is a global measure of inequality, you see that the US has a higher Gini. When the Gini is 0, if we all earn the same, if Bertrand earns everything and we earn nothing, the Gini is at 1, okay? So they have a higher Gini in the US than you have in Germany, France, Denmark, and Scandinavians. They have a higher poverty rate in the US. But the worst part is probably Case Angus Deaton, the death of despair. In the US, they look at the mortality rate of unskilled middle-aged individuals. And you see that's the continuous black line. It has gone up a lot since the 2000s. They are subject to lots of stress, and they take opioids, sleeping pills. They really, you have a high death rate of unskilled middle-aged, okay? Because they don't have a good, if you lose your employment in the US, you lose largely access to health services, and you're subject to an enormous amount of stress. So that's, I really encourage you to read anything by Anne Case and Angus Deaton on. And so, but on the other hand, of course, when it comes to innovation, the US is right above us. I mean, I showed you the Antonin's picture, saying the US is right above Europe. But if you look even in terms of triadic patent flow, the patents that are registered in the US Patent Office, Japanese Patent Office, and the European Patent Office, the very high quality patents, US per million inhabitants, US is above everybody. So US is more innovative, but they have a very bad social model, okay? So then there is a debate. And that's a debate where that's one of the things I don't fully agree with some other of my colleagues. Some people believe that to become more innovative, you should renounce social model. And if you put emphasis on social model, you should renounce being innovative. I want to mention at least 3 policies that would make you both more innovative and more inclusive and protective. One is the flex security system in Denmark, on the Danish labor market. One is education, and the third one is competition. So let me just mention those quickly. Okay. Our colleague Alexandra Roulet, she's at INSEAD and we know her well. She looked at the effect on health of losing your job in Denmark. In Denmark, you have the flex security system. When you lose your job for 2 years, you have 90% of your salary. The state retrains you and helps you find a new job. If you refuse more than 2 jobs in your qualification, then the unemployment benefit starts going on. It's a very good system. She compared the evolution of health indicators for workers that are in firms that close down to identical workers in age, experience, and education in firms that don't close down. She does a difference in difference. So 0 is the time where there is the closing down of the treatment group worker, and the control group is similar workers in firms that do not close down. You see no effect. So it's different. I compare before and after the closing down of the firm between the treatment group and the control group. And you see no effect of losing your job on purchase of antidepressant, anti-anxiety, unlike the US, okay? No effect of losing your job on the probability to visit hospital for circulatory problem, and no effect on mortality. So that really, they have a good system. And when they invented this flex security system, it made creative destruction work much better. So it boosted innovation, but without, and it protected people even better. So there is no problem there moving from job to job. AI, there will be lots of job destruction and job creation. We need more than ever the flex security system. So I advocate the Danish system everywhere. And we are not yet there in France, but in the US, they are even further away from a flex security system, okay? So that's one case of flex security would make you more innovative because it will make creative destruction work better and will make you also more protective. Education here is based on the work that has been done by various authors and co-authors. It shows you the probability of inventing as a function of your parental income. And you see this J curve. You are much more likely to invent when your parents are in the highest percentiles of income distribution, okay? And that's true in the US current data. That's the work by Bell, Shetty, Jaravel, Petkova, Van Reenen, QJE. That's true on US historical data, work by Aksigit, Grigsby, and Nicholas. There should be an A there. And it's true also in Finland, in work that we did with Ufuk, Harri Aitinen, and Otto Toivonen for Finland. We were very surprised that you would find a J curve in Finland, because in Finland, the education system is of very high quality and totally free from kindergarten to university. So how come they have a J curve? And in fact, the reason is right there. It's that the high-earning parents are also more educated parents. They transmit knowledge and aspirations to their children. So when you control for parental education, you see the curve shifts from this very J curve to becoming much flatter, you see? And so in Finland, it's a lot due to the fact that the higher earning parents are also the more educated parents, and they transmit knowledge and aspiration to their children, which increases their probability of becoming inventors. But now you would say that doesn't solve the enigma totally, because if the school system were so good in Finland, why should parental input matter at all? But in fact, what happened in Finland, they had a reform in 1970. It's in 1970 that they made education, broad-based. You see, before there used to be few people going all the way to university, and most people stopping at grade 7 or whatever. And they did their education reform in 1970. So here what I'm doing, I look at the extent to which the reform will switch upward, will boost the probability of inventing for children with various types of parents. And you see that the reform, I look at the ratio probability of inventing depending on your parental income, if you went to school after the reform versus before the reform. And you see that the reform in Finland, they boosted probability of invention for children who were in these brackets, whose parents were in those brackets. So in fact, you see why it was a very good reform, because you see in Finland, you had a problem everywhere of lost Einsteins or lost Marie Curie. We have many smart kids, but they don't become inventors because they are not favored by the social environment to get into innovation. You implement a reform like in Finland in 1970, you will boost innovation because many more people can become inventors, but you make the economic growth much more inclusive. So that's another reform which makes you more inclusive and more innovative, okay? And finally, competition. I told you, going back to the joint work with Antonin and Clino, Bopart, and Lee, I told you that, there is this growth decline as of the 2000, because you had the GAFAM, the superstar firms in the US, inhibiting entry and innovation by new firms. Of course, if you were to reform competition policy, you will make growth, you will boost growth, but in fact, you will also make growth more inclusive, because in other work with Antonin, which is the first paper we worked together, we showed that where there is more entrant innovation, there is more social mobility. Why? Because creative destruction is a source of social mobility. So if you boost competition, you are boosting innovation. but you also boost social mobility, because anything that favors creative destruction is an engine of social mobility. So that's why I wanted to say. I think now I'm almost done. No, should we fear AI? I think I won't have time to talk about AI in detail, but I want just to tell you the basic conclusion of this. First, creative destruction can deliver sustained and inclusive growth, provided you put in place the appropriate institutions and policies. And the part on AI, but that's in the slides, and you can look at the slides. I want to say that AI has considerable growth potential, and it also has employment creation potential. And I want to tell you in words why. Why does AI has growth potential? Because AI automate tasks not only in the production of goods and services, but also in the production of ideas. It's easier to have new ideas. Many new ideas are recombination of old ideas. You can get many more recombinations with AI. So AI will make the innovation process easier. So AI, and we quantified and we argued that AI has a substantial growth potential. The big problem with AI is competition. It's exactly the same as with IT. I told you about the GAFAM. The problem is that in the upstream segments of the AI value chain, the GAFAM are there. Cloud, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, graphic processes, GPU. So the big problem there is that you have to reform competition policy, because otherwise the growth potential of AI, you won't be able to fully take advantage of it. Employment creation, why is that? Because firms that adopt AI become more productive, therefore more competitive. So the world demand for their product increases and they employ more. That productivity effect is very important. We showed that with Simon Bunel and Antonin Nadeau. And but at the same time, I told you that you have many new ideas with AI. That will be new activities. So of course, AI will destroy some jobs, but AI will create new jobs. To take advantage of it, you need a flex security system. And to have a good flex security system, you need a good education system. So if you have a good competition policy, a good education system with good PISA tests and flex security, appropriate flex security system, you will do the best you can. You will really take advantage of the growth and employment potential of AI. And that's what I want to say. So really that's the idea there, is that AI will be a source of creative destruction. It will boost creative destruction, which is good news in a sense, because I was telling you about growth. Europe, growth, we have a kind of sluggish growth in Europe. And I think AI is one hope of boosting growth in Europe, but it will be a source of more creative destruction probably, and that's why you need to have appropriate institutions to take the best advantage. I'm personally optimistic on technology. Where I'm not so optimistic is on our ability to change institutions and to adapt our policies and institutions to the new policies. Voilà, that's I think I should finish there, and thank you so much. Voilà. Time for.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Philippe, for this very entertaining and interesting presentation. Thank you very much, Antonin. We have a few minutes maybe for some questions in the audience.
We have some time for questions. So that I think that's what I want. We have 15 minutes for questions.
Who wants to kick off?
Always the first question. Then when it starts.
Okay, hi. So thank you very much for the very, very interesting explanation. So I'm actually doing my PhD on what you're doing, so kind of know your literature here. And I have a question. So you mentioned a lot of time we have to allow for failures, except that it's hard to go to investor and say, hey, finance my failure, except that the more failure we have, the more success we have. So how to convince investor to actually invest in ourselves, I mean, failure. I will likely fail, so it's okay. So to invest in failure, to then get profit with a very small probability of profit out of all the failures that we get.
That's where it depends who you ask. If you ask a bank, it may be hard. If you ask a venture capitalist, she or he bets on something. She or he invests in what you are doing. She believes in your project. So for example, Mistral, for example, is not failing, but it will take a while until Mistral generates high income, I guess. Yann Lequin, Yann LeCun, I say Yann Lequin, they say Yann LeCun, but we say Yann Lequin, just left Meta. He's starting a new firm. It will not, he has very ambitious project. He wants to go beyond LLM. He thinks LLM is obsolete and he will invent something better than LLM, okay? Much more advanced, much more intelligent than LLM. It will take a while until it may fail, but there are people who are ready to invest in Yann Lequin. He's a very smart guy, and it may become the next revolution. So the venture capitalists, and what's very interesting, the institutional investor, pension funds and mutual funds. When I started doing my work with Van Reenen and Zingales on mutual funds, it's a paper in the Review of Economic Studies. I forgot now, 2001, I forgot the year, but I only have one paper with the two of them. I thought first that they were short-termists. And in fact, we realized they were not short-termists. And then I thought that it was because they are lazy managers and they push them to not to be lazy. It was, they had much more effect on more competitive markets, which have more risk. So economy and competition was already pushing people to do things. So it was really the story that they shield managers against short-term failure to let them take risk. It's very much Holmström, Bank Holmström. I don't know if you read Contract Theory, Managerial Incentives. Bank has a beautiful paper on managerial incentive and how you overcome the fact that managers, especially of large firms, don't want to take risks because they are, scared by the prospect of failure. And it's very interesting that the institutional investors have played that role of, saying, I know who you are, I believe in you, and if you fail in the short run, I won't punish you as much. And there is indeed evidence, and that's what we found with Zingales and Van Reenen, that wherever you have a higher share of institutional investment, there is less dismissal of managers following bad news in the short run. So there are mechanisms, and that's where it's important to have. That's where the Draghi, you need the venture capital, you need institutional investor, and you need the LabEx. The LabEx is another way to say, you don't have to fill up application every 5 years. It means that after 3 years already, you need to start filling up the next application. I give you 10 years so that you can take more risk. I think those are the mechanisms that favor long-term. Of course, you could say, how do I make sure I select the good people? International juries are the ways to select people who might think. In the US also on research, there is a Howard Hughes Medical Investigator. It's a private foundation, and they select people, they bet on them. Or the MacArthur Foundation, and they bet on people like they did with Esther Duflo. Esther Duflo got a Genius Grant, and they say, Esther, we believe in you. Go on, you see, at a time where it was not obvious that Esther research would lead to something. And that's what they have, I think. Sorry to...
Thank you very much, Philippe. Another last question.
À bientôt, au revoir.
Thank you very much for this presentation. I was wondering what's your take on decoupling between GDP growth and environmental footprint? The fact that our emissions our footprint can decrease while growth can increase. As far as I know, the literature shows that it has been observed only in a limited number of countries, and
that growth increase.
Growth can increase while our footprint can decrease. Our environmental footprint can decrease, like greenhouse gases.
Oh, the décroissance.
Yeah, exactly. So, as far as I know, literature has shown that this has been observed only in limited number of countries and over a limited amount of time.
Yes.
What's your take on that? And
that's a big area where we work in the lab on green innovation. So I've done, I've done work about it. A lot of done by other people, Antoine de Chez-Lepré, David Emous. Those are the top on this field. And I had a chance to work with David, and we did a paper with David and Darren. There are a number of things that the degrowth people say that are absolutely right. I believe that global warming has everything to do with growth. I believe that. If you look at the temperature evolution, it mirrors the Madison curve that I showed you. It's exactly at the time where you have the growth takeoff that you have the temperature takeoff. So that's not enough. That would not be enough evidence to publish in the top 5 journal. But I mean, there is enormous smoking gun that warming has a lot to do with growth, the way it was done. okay, and the first industrial revolution. They tell you also you should be sober. They are right. They tell you that per GDP measured do not fully capture the growth that you want. They're right in that respect. But I believe very much that green innovation will be the way out. But green in a very broad sense, innovation in our behavior, in our way of consuming, in a way of organizing production, finding new source of energy, cheaper ways to, less energy consuming ways to produce, way to adapt to global warming, the dikes, les digues, and air conditioning systems, you know, the amelioration innovation, la géo-ingénierie pour refroidir l'air. So I believe that I believe green innovation is the way out. The problem is that firms do not spontaneously innovate green, and that's why government is important, carbon tax and in green industrial policy to redirect firms' innovation toward green. But I think, and also moving from quantity to quality. So, for example, I have a recent paper called Endogenous Degrowth with Zili Botti, Michael Peters, Timo Boppart, okay, and Matthew Schwarzman. And we say that, you know, as countries become more, you know, richer collectively, we tend to go for more quality intensive good, that are also more service intensive good. And that's something also that can play a role to make. And what's very interesting is that the quality growth is less well captured by measured GDP, you see. So we are catering to a number of things that the degrowth people say, but yet we are in favor of innovation, of green innovation, which includes quality innovation, even that it cannot be perfectly measured and reflected in GDP data, in per capita GDP data. So that's my take on the green, yeah, in a nutshell.
Okay, I think we will stop here because
yes,
Philippe has
to go back to
come
Paris.
to the academy. He has
so
another
much,
appointment.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. It was a privilege to have you at this Nobel lecture at CREST and Institut Polytechnique. Thanks to both of you to coming, and thanks to everyone for being here. See you next year.
Bye. Moi, j'ai pas eu le temps de parler d'IA beaucoup. C'était un peu tôt. Mais on reviendra. Antonin, c'était formidable ce que vous avez fait, hein, vraiment.
Philippe, tu te rappelles que vous avez dit une semaine avant le Nobel que tu l'aurais pas cette année, c'est incroyable.
Je te l'avais dit une semaine, j'étais certain. Je te l'avais dit, Daron l'a eu l'an dernier, ils vont faire d'autres choses. Mais on n'y croyait pas. Ah ouais, c'est incroyable.